Wow, you really went all in on this one, huh? You send over articles and reports, even some of your own notes about BRICS. It's clearly got your attention. And I gotta say, I get it. This block of nations is really shaking things up. So in this deep dive, we're gonna take a look at how BRICS is evolving and what this expansion could mean for the future of, well, global power, basically. And to help me unpack all this, I've got an expert here with me today. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is BRICS, and why is its recent growth causing such a stir?
Okay, so BRICS goes back to 2009. It started as a group of 5 major emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The idea was to create a platform for these nations to kind of push back against, the dominance of Western-led institutions like the World Bank and the IMF. And now fast forward to 2024, and things have gotten really interesting, with the addition of new members forming what's being called BRICS Plus.
So it's not just an acronym anymore, it's BRICS. And it's got some serious players joining the ranks. What's the significance of adding members like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the UAE?
Well, think about their combined influence. We're talking about a significant chunk of global crude oil production, a quarter of global GDP, and almost half the world's population. That's a huge shift in the global landscape, wouldn't you say?
Those numbers are pretty mind-blowing. So what's driving these countries to join BRICS? Seems like they're turning away from those established Western-led systems.
Yeah, you're picking up on something there for sure. Recent events like the war in Ukraine, climate change initiatives, and even the COVID-19 pandemic have really pushed a lot of developing nations to look for alternatives to that Western-led order. They're feeling like their interests aren't being represented, and they're looking for more autonomy. There is a report from the Boston Consulting Group. It found that many of these nations are engaging with both developed economies and China, creating a potential coalition that's less reliant on the West.
So a real sense that they want to forge their own path. And the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace actually suggested that BRICS Plus is becoming a vehicle for emerging powers to really push their own agendas and kind of reshape the existing rules of the global system. It's not just about economic cooperation, it's about power.
Exactly. BRICS Plus is challenging that existing balance of power. It's a platform where these emerging powers can band together to push for changes that benefit their interests.
Okay, let's get into specifics. The sources we've got here highlight 5 key ways BRICS Plus could shift the world order. Energy is a big one. With major oil producers like Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the UAE in the mix, alongside massive energy consumers like China and India, BRICS Plus seems like it has a real opportunity to kind of reshape that global energy market. Could we see them creating an entirely new system for energy trading?
It's definitely possible. Imagine BRICS Plus nations start trading oil in their own currencies, or create new payment systems that bypass the US dollar altogether. That could have a serious ripple effect on global energy prices and really challenge that petrodollar system that's been in place for decades.
So not just a shift in who holds the power, but a complete restructuring of how the energy market operates. That's massive.
And it's not just energy. Trade within BRICS is booming. In fact, intra-BRICS trade has already surpassed trade between BRICS and G7 nations. It's a clear sign that these nations are prioritizing economic ties with each other.
Which brings us to another key point, the China Plus One strategy. Businesses are adopting this as a way to diversify their supply chains. The BCG report suggests that companies need to think beyond China to reduce dependence on a single country.
Right. Many companies are realizing that diversifying those supply chains can make them much more resilient in the face of global uncertainty. BRICS Plus offers alternative manufacturing hubs and consumer markets, so businesses can spread their risk and capitalize on those new opportunities.
So while China is still a major player, the BRICS Plus landscape is becoming more about finding the right mix of partners and resources to create a more resilient and globally integrated business model.
It's about finding that balance, right? Adapting to the changing dynamics of global trade.
And of course, no conversation about BRICS Plus would be complete without talking about de-dollarization. It's a concept that's generating a lot of buzz these days. So what exactly does it mean, and how is BRICS Plus pushing this agenda?
De-dollarization basically refers to the efforts to move away from using the US dollar as the dominant currency in international trade and finance. And we're seeing signs of this happening. The new development bank, or NDB, is starting to issue loans in the Chinese yuan. There's even been talk of a BRICS-backed digital currency. These moves are all designed to chip away at the dollar's dominance and give BRICS Plus nations more control over their own financial systems.
So a BRICS-backed digital currency, that would be a game changer. What would the real-world implications be if they were to actually move away from the US dollar?
Well, it's a long-term process for sure. But if BRICS Plus can create a viable alternative to the dollar, it could significantly weaken the US's influence on the global economy. Imagine a world where trade deals, investments, even oil contracts are negotiated in a basket of BRICS currencies instead of the dollar.
Okay, so we've got energy, trade, and finance, three huge areas where BRICS Plus is making moves. But the sources also highlight technology and infrastructure as major points of focus. Could you expand on those a bit?
Sure. When it comes to technology, you've got China leading the charge, particularly in things like 5G, artificial intelligence, and renewable energy. They're pushing for a more multipolar tech landscape, challenging the dominance of those Western tech giants and providing alternative solutions to other BRICS Plus members.
And with infrastructure, there's a huge push for development within BRICS Plus as well. For example, the NDB is already funding a bunch of projects in India with a focus on transportation infrastructure. It seems like they're laying the groundwork not just for economic growth, but also for greater connectivity and integration within the bloc.
Exactly. They're investing in everything from transportation networks to energy grids, not just to boost their own economies, of course, but also to create a more integrated and interconnected BRICS Plus bloc that can operate more independently from those Western-led systems.
So we've got energy, trade, finance, technology, and infrastructure. 5 key areas where BRICS Plus is really making an impact. But it's not all smooth sailing, right? What are some of the challenges and potential conflicts brewing within this seemingly powerful alliance?
You're right, it's not a perfect union by any means. The Carnegie source pointed out the rivalry between China and India, for example, two of the biggest players in BRICS Plus last year. And then you've got the tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran, countries with those long-standing conflicts and opposing ideologies.
So how do those internal conflicts play out in a group that's trying to present a united front on the world stage? And what does this potentially fragile alliance mean for companies trying to navigate this new landscape? We'll dive into that right after this.
Well, it's a balancing act for sure, despite all those tensions, you know. The BRICS Plus nations have found some common ground. They all want to reform those global institutions, create a system where they have a bigger voice.
So that shared ambition might be enough to keep them together for now. But what does it mean for businesses? How do they operate in this environment with all these moving parts?
The BCG report we talked about earlier actually has some recommendations. They outlined 5 key things that businesses should focus on. Tailoring their strategies for the BRICS Plus market specifically, taking advantage of that infrastructure boom we discussed, diversifying supply chains beyond China, strengthening risk and compliance procedures, and building what they call geopolitical muscle.
Geopolitical muscle. That sounds intriguing. What does that even mean for a company?
It basically means companies need to become more savvy about global politics, you know? They need to understand the political landscape in those BRICS Plus countries, build relationships with key stakeholders, be prepared to adapt to those changing geopolitical winds.
So it's not just about understanding the market. It's about understanding the political dynamics and potential risks.
Exactly. And the China Plus One concept is still critical too. Companies are realizing that over-reliance on China can be risky. Especially with those rising tensions between the US and China, BRICS Plus offers alternative locations for manufacturing sourcing, even research and development.
So BRICS Plus isn't about just challenging the West. It's about providing options, diversifying that global economic landscape.
That's a key takeaway, I think. It's not a zero-sum game. It's about creating a more multipolar world with more choices.
Okay, so we've talked about how BRICS Plus is challenging that existing world order. But how's the West reacting to all of this? Are they just dismissing BRICS Plus, or are they taking it seriously?
Oh, they're definitely paying attention. Even if their public statements sometimes downplay a BRICS,
Yeah.
Actions speak louder than words, and we've seen some pretty strong reactions, especially when it comes to economic measures.
The sanctions against Russia are a prime example. They were designed to isolate Russia. But it seems like they've actually pushed some countries closer to BRICS Plus.
You're right. The sanctions have kind of exposed the vulnerabilities of a dollar-dominated system. Countries that are really reliant on the US and its allies are starting to realize they need other options to protect their own economic interests.
So it's like the West is inadvertently pushing countries towards BRICS Plus account by trying to hold on to the existing order.
Unintended consequences, right? It's creating a more complex and unpredictable global landscape.
We talked earlier about de-dollarization. But how realistic is it for BRICS Plus to actually ditch the US dollar? It seems pretty radical given how entrenched the dollar is in that global financial system.
It's a long-term goal for sure. It's not going to happen overnight.
Of course.
But we are seeing steps in that direction. We've got the NDB issuing loans in yuan, the BRICS Pay app enabling transactions in other currencies. There are a bunch of bilateral agreements between those BRICS Plus nations to trade in their local currencies, all to reduce their reliance on the dollar.
So they're creating alternative pathways. The pasted text source we got actually mentioned that BRICS nations are accumulating gold and that China's selling off U.S. Treasury bonds.
Right. It's all part of a strategy to diversify those reserves, move away from those dollar-denominated assets, create a more multipolar financial system that's not so dependent on the U.S.
Okay, let's bring Russia back into the picture here. The BRICS summit is being held in Kazan this year.
Yeah.
Which seems pretty strategic given the current climate.
Absolutely. Hosting the BRICS summit is a way for Putin to show that Russia's not isolated. Despite those Western sanctions, it's a chance to project strength, demonstrate that Russia still has allies and partners on the global stage.
And Saudi Arabia's decision to join BRICS Plus, along with all that interest from other countries, shows that those efforts to isolate Russia haven't been entirely successful. Like BRICS Plus is becoming a counterweight to Western influence.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge to that Western-led order. It shows that the world is becoming more multipolar, with countries looking for alternatives to those traditional power structures.
Speaking of challenging the old order, let's talk about the grain market. It might seem like a surprising topic, but the sources highlight how the conflict in Ukraine has really shaken things up. And BRICS Plus is playing a significant role.
Yeah, you're right. Before the war, Ukraine was a major player in the global grain market. They were even surpassing Russia in exports. But the conflict has really impacted Ukraine's production.
And Russia's kind of stepped in to fill the void, right? Using its grain exports as leverage.
Yeah. But the pasted text source also points out that other BRICS Plus members, like Brazil and India, are major players in the grain market too. They're stepping up to meet global demand, which shows the bloc's growing influence on global food security.
So BRICS Plus is becoming a force to be reckoned with, not just in energy and finance, but also in controlling those essential resources like food. It's a power shift with some far-reaching consequences. But how does all this affect the existing institutions like the G20? Is BRICS Plus looking to replace it or work within it? And what does a future with a more powerful BRICS Plus actually look like? We'll explore those questions and more in our final segment.
The relationship between BRICS Plus and the G20, it's complicated. Some analysts see BRICS Plus as a potential rival to the G20, Others think it could work within that existing framework to push for reforms. The G20 itself is facing pressure from both sides. You've got the G7 strengthening ties on one hand, and the BRICS Plus members asserting their own voices on the other, demanding a greater say in global governance.
It's like a tug-of-war within the G20. The China Daily article mentioned this Friends for Peace group meeting, co-chaired by China and Brazil. They're focused on finding a peaceful resolution to the conflict in Ukraine. It seems like BRICS Plus is trying to position itself as a diplomatic force, too.
Right. They want to be seen as a responsible stakeholder in global affairs, capable of mediating conflicts and offering alternative solutions.
So it's not just about creating a parallel system. It's about having a seat at the table and influencing how things are run globally.
That's the goal. And the rise of BRICS Plus raises some fundamental questions about the future. Will we see a more fragmented world with competing blocs? Or can BRICS Plus and the West find ways to coexist and cooperate? What would a truly multipolar world actually look like? And how would BRICS Plus shape it?
Those are some big questions. But let's bring this back to our listener. Why should they care about BRICS Plus? How might this affect their life, their business, or their investments?
Well, first and foremost, BRICS Plus represents a shift in the global balance of power. That new dynamic is likely to increase geopolitical competition and volatility, which can impact everything: global trade, investment flows, political stability.
So even if you don't directly deal with those BRICS Plus nations, you're going to feel the effects of their actions.
Yeah, absolutely. And the economic rise of BRICS Plus is creating both opportunities and risks for businesses. They need to adapt their strategies. The growth of BRICS Plus markets could mean new customers and revenue streams, but it also means increased competition and the need to navigate new regulations and business practices.
Okay, but what about the average person? The one who isn't involved in global trade or high finance? How might they be affected by BRICS Plus?
The de-dollarization push could impact the stability of the global financial system, potentially leading to currency fluctuations and inflation, which could affect the prices of everyday things as the cost of imports and exports changes.
So it's not just about governments and big businesses. Those ripple effects of BRICS Plus expansion are going to be felt by everyone.
And the rise of Chinese tech companies within BRICS, that could have a big impact on the digital landscape, potentially leading to a more fragmented internet, the emergence of new technologies and platforms that challenge that Western dominance.
So our online experiences, the devices we use, even how we communicate, it could all be shaped by the tech developments within BRICS Plus.
The BRICS Plus story, it's about much more than just economics or geopolitics. It's about how the world is changing, who holds the power, and what the future might hold.
This deep dive has been eye-opening for me. We've covered a lot of ground, but it feels like we're just scratching the surface.
There's always more to learn, right? The BRICS Plus story is constantly evolving. The key is to stay curious. Keep asking questions and be willing to adapt.
So to our listener, we encourage you to continue exploring BRICS Plus on your own. Don't just take our word for it. Dive into those sources, research different perspectives, and form your own conclusions. The future is being shaped as we speak, and it's up to each of us to understand what's happening.
That journey of discovery never really ends. There's always something new to learn, especially in a world that's changing so fast.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into BRICS Plus. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.